Driven by the increasing pace of change and complexities of the work environment, industries and organizations around the world have sharpened their focus on the idea of skills management. I did a little digging on this topic and found this idea of skills management is not just a buzzword or a passing fad. Check out some of these stats. According to PricewaterhouseCoopers' 23rd Annual Global CEO Survey, 74% of CEOs are concerned about the availability of key skills within their organizations. And as far as the executives themselves, a recent McKinsey report indicates that 9 out of 10 executives face current skill gaps or expect them in the next 5 years. That's a lot. So, what exactly is skills management? How is it different than what you may already be doing? How do leaders get their arms around this topic? And where do we go from here? That's what's on the docket today.
Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Welcome to the Performance Matters podcast from GP Strategies, your workforce transformation partner. In each episode, we'll interview industry experts and explore best practices and innovative insights to help your organization improve performance.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Michael Teal. By day, I'm a creative director serving within the innovation team at GP Strategies. Now, a perk of my job is that I also get the honor of hosting the GP Performance Matters podcast. And today's topic is one that is at the heart of workforce transformation, and that is skills management in the larger learning landscape. I'm pleased to be joined in the virtual studio today by a dynamic duo of guests. Here with me is John Pliskwellic, Vice President of Human Capital Technologies here at GP, and Jai Shah, CEO and founder of Kahuna Workforce Solutions. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me here. I appreciate it.
Yes, of course. Thank you for having us.
Talk about a virtual world here. I'm in Phoenix. Jai, you're in California, I'm assuming, correct?
Solana Beach, California. Yep.
Love it. Beautiful area. I'll trade you spots here in about 2 months, when the temperature starts rising. And I want to start, though, with John, because, John, tell us where you're at right now.
I am in lovely Maui, Hawaii.
I love it. I love it. This is the benefit of a virtual world. We're all staring at each other in podcast world right here. So, but John, tell me a little bit about this. Thank you, number one, for carving out time on your vacation to be with us. But just share a little bit of your background.
Yeah, so I started in this space actually in HR out of graduate school. My background is actually in industrial organizational psychology. And after giving that a go for a while, I got into HRIT systems consulting and specifically got into SAP SuccessFactors and have been doing that for over 20 years and, have had multiple roles from configuration consultant all the way up to project management and then also running my own company. Now I manage a team of consultants that implement HR systems for clients.
So you're just a baby in this industry is what I'm hearing, right? Just a tiny little green pea. So appreciate that. Thank you for taking your time. Jai, how about you? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. So much like John, although John's a little older than I am, I have a consulting background as well. And I think that's important in terms of our shared passion around this subject and what it takes to make it successful. The idea of kind of selling enterprise change and helping organizations through that change is really central to our mission. But about 25 years in the human capital management space, my very first project for Deloitte Consulting many, many moons ago was with the Kohler Corporation, actually. And Kohler was really looking to invest in technology that would give them a better sense of their skills DNA. I'll never forget that term. They use that term, skills DNA. And if you're not familiar with Kohler, they manufacture very specialized products in kind of bath and plumbing. And they were, really interested in what made their skilled tradesmen different and what made them special and how they contributed to the organization. And I remember thinking, if HR isn't serving that mission, really, what is HR there for? It's about understanding your people, understanding your workforce. So that's where I got first interested in that problem of skills management, how to digitize it, how to capture that data and then make it available to the organization. So that's a little bit about where I got my passion for this.
You know what? I also want to say thank you for the work you did with Kohler. My sinks look great in my house, and I'll think of that every time here. So, in preparation for cutting this podcast, I was doing a little bit of dreaming. Being a creative director, and one of the things I was thinking about in my mind was the concept of video games. I mean, we're all probably, we grew up in the 80s, and the fact where you could see the actual skills on your Bo Jackson or your John Madden type games. And I was thinking, are we kind of maybe getting close to that in our world, in actual enterprise performance? So that leads me to my first question for you both, is that we know that skills, the concept of skills management, is certainly a buzzword right now. Jai, let's start with you on this. Why is this such a trending topic?
I'm reflecting on what you just said. Why did you want to see that data about your players in that video game, right? It's so you'd have a competitive advantage. You'd make those players a competitive advantage over your buddies, and you could, dominate Madden. And, what we're finding is that organizations today are craving that data to help them with decision-making. We've had so much investment in how to measure your supply chain, how to measure the performance of your equipment, automation. It's really time that measurement of human performance, not in a judgmental way, but in a kind of an objective way to help both the worker and the organization get the best outcome. It's time that organizations need to invest in those solutions, and it's all about making that worker better, making the workforce more competitive. I think there's no. It's not a coincidence that also many of the core industries that are interested in this problem are also going through a lot of change right now. So if you look at energy, for instance, the green revolution, non-traditional resources, that takes a different skill set than drilling for traditional oil, or even drilling for oil in more complicated ways and deeper environments. That takes a different skill set. So change in the industry is a big driver. And then finally, there is a little thing called COVID, the pandemic influence of, just a new way to work virtually and understand where your skills and capability really exists within the organization, and then being able to kind of manage the transparency, even though you're not able to see the person virtually. Just like in your video game, can I understand what their capabilities are? And that's becoming super important.
Absolutely. John, what are your thoughts on that too?
Yeah, I think, COVID has been a huge game changer in terms of how executives and managers view their workforce, right? I mean, not only just looking at the way that people are working virtually and working from their homes on a regular basis now, I think there was a feeling that managers, just because they could lay eyeballs on their employees and see their employees working, that they understood what their skill sets were. But now that people are working remotely, they're not able to get a pulse on a day-to-day basis in terms of, how are my employees performing. Now it is, with COVID, it has absolutely gotten managers to a point where they need to be able to look at something, a report or some sort of technology that shows, assesses where people are against the skills that are required for their jobs. And so what we're seeing a lot is our clients are asking more about, pretty rudimentary. How do we assess these things? It's not like a traditional performance appraisal where I'm just asking you, did you meet your goals? Now it's way more important for managers and executives to be able to say, where are we as an organization from a skill set perspective, to be able to meet our objectives, both from a job role perspective as well as from an organizational perspective. Where do our employees individually stack up against those competencies? And so we're having some pretty basic conversations with our clients in terms of shifting from those basic older school style performance management to looking at something much more tactile in terms of understanding where people are relative to the skills within their job roles and be able to report on that.
That's one thing that kind of hit me when I was doing some due diligence here, Jai, when I was checking out your organization, Kahuna, was really seeing some of the dashboard potentials and what you're saying, John, of having this you've got this elusive virtual corporation in many ways, being able to put some tangible performance metrics to different staff, almost like I don't want to go too far down the sports road, but like baseball cards, right? When we were kids and you'd say, okay, this person hit 52 home runs last year, right? And this one can't break the Mendoza line. So if it's time for a role, which one maybe is going to have the advantage, even though technically they're both Major League Baseball players, So it's kind of exciting. I just want to give some kudos out there. Shout out, Jai. It looks like your tool's pretty interesting. So I wanted to ask you, Jai, what industries do you notice that are really embracing and leading the way, leading this forefront of this skills management?
Yeah, so I think there's a spectrum, and we think about two dimensions to our market. We think about industries, and then we think about workforces within those industries, so actual employee demographics within those industries. So, from an industry perspective, when we're talking about these operational skills and the need to track them, we're seeing regulated industries and industries that are technically differentiated. So healthcare, manufacturing, energy, in many cases, professional services, as core, aerospace and defense. Those are core industries. And then within those industries, we're seeing workforces like everything from specialized engineering to field service workers who are very tactile to nurses. So it's those types of workforces. And in manufacturing, a lot of times the operators, the line operators. And the last point I'll make here is those workforces, especially the deskless worker, have really been left behind by traditional HR technology. So this idea of being able to quickly assess or understand where I am against my skill requirements, that's a very difficult thing to do if you think you have to log into your HR system where you maybe go to check your benefits. It's not the same experience. It's got to be delivered in the flow of work. And so, that's kind of, something that we've really focused on is that deskless worker and making sure that use case is really well catered to.
Yeah, so I agree with Jai 100% in terms of what he's saying. We too are hearing from very large organizations. Specifically, we've got a couple of defense contractors that are asking specifically around their skilled workforce, the tradesmen. But as Jai was saying, we're also seeing this come up in industries where you've got more technical engineering or scientific skilled individuals like pharma. So we've got some customers in the pharma space that are also looking for help in this space, for sure.
Who's typically responsible for solving this problem? I know everyone's, performance matters for everyone, but who is that individual that says that's my stake that I'm holding? Who is that? Jai?
Yeah, so, again, focused on that operational skilling problem where the workforce is very tactile. It's normally not, believe it or not, it's not necessarily coming directly from HR. It's not an HR person necessarily raising their hand and saying, we need to go solve this problem. Rather, it's operations craving that skill data, just like you crave that skill data on your Madden players.
Right.
It's somebody who owns the outcome if something goes wrong with the workforce, or they're not able to produce with quality, or they're not a competitor, they can't meet customer demand. So, however, I don't want to diminish HR's role and responsibility in executing. And this is where maybe John could comment a little bit on kind of how these programs come to life. But our typical motion is we get engaged with an operational leader who has this need and we encourage them to partner up with their HR counterpart and then kind of go solve that collaboratively. Because this doesn't exist if it's truly just operations or just HR. It's got to be a collaboration. And learning and development specifically is kind of where this typically falls to go execute. And learning and development has always been one of those hot potatoes. Does that sit in business? Does it sit in HR? Technical training often sits in the operational side. General corporate learning sits on the HR side. So it's one of those types of situations where you kind of have to figure out what's the best collaborative approach to lead to that business outcome that the organization is counting on out of an initiative like this.
Yeah, that's interesting. John, what's your take on it?
Yeah, so similar to what Jai is saying, and I mean, typically from our perspective, we are talking to the HR folks, but that's because of what Jai is saying is the operations folks have come to HR asking for some help and solutions from a technical perspective around how to manage this process. And that one of those large defense contractors I was talking about, this is specifically the case where somebody in operations was given the charter to manage this proficiency and skills program. They went to HR and started working with the learning group, the person that's over both learning and career development from a technical perspective, from an HRIS perspective. And so the question that we have there is more around, so where does this technology fit in the overall HRIS landscape?
Right.
Is it something that should be part of learning? Is it something that should be something separate? And what we tend to help our clients understand is that, the skills management component of this is what drives the demand for the other HR functions or HR processes. So once you identify what those potential skills gaps are, that's where you see that gap. That's what drives the learning demand, and then that's what also drives the demand from a development perspective. And so it just needs to integrate with those processes and technology.
Thinking about this visually is that it's almost like the Avengers coming together, right? You have traditional HR with compliance training. You've got operations doing the work, and then this learning and development group that's, depending on the company, sitting somewhere everywhere. So it's almost like they're all coming together and creating this new synthesis of skills management. Am I getting close on this? What do you think, Jai?
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on. And the point that I would kind of emphasize out of that is collecting skills data just to collect it doesn't do anybody any good. So it truly needs to integrate. It is the Avengers coming together. And if you do that, you now have an ecosystem, which I think is part of, the learning landscape. I think of it as an ecosystem where you have a bunch of downstream systems that now are skill aware, which make them that much smarter in the way they can recommend learning, the way that you can get a resource kind of developed more quickly in a more personalized fashion. And that's just not possible if you don't understand the baseline proficiency of all these critical skills in your organization and understand where you should be making those bets and investments in learning. So, it truly is kind of a supply and demand type of equation where the demand for that learning, as John mentioned, is really informed by the supply of your current capabilities and what you're trying to, change.
Absolutely.
Over time.
So speaking about this in terms of making an approach, how would you say are organizations changing their approach to learning then when they do adopt this skilling mindset?
So what we're seeing is, take a large field services company that the typical motion, or even a healthcare company organization, typical motion is I hire somebody into a job role. I've got a long curricula mapped out for that employee when they come in on board. And I know it's going to take me 9 to 12 months before they're going to be really unsupervised operating in their role. And everybody goes through the same templatized, job code based training. And then sometimes if I transfer from one organization to another, I start that journey over, or I have a lot of redundant, repetitive training because it's all based on a standard curricula that's been developed. And I have no idea whether half that training is even relevant for me, because I'm an experienced hire. I'm walking in with 80% of the skills and proficiencies that, I need to do the job. I should really just be focused on that 20%. Or I'm never going to go work on a customer job that has certain equipment or specific criteria. So why am I bothering training the person in those procedures and equipment? So what we're seeing is the mindset shifts from a templatized global learning first view to a skill building or capability first view of how we need to develop our people. And that makes it much more efficient, targeted, personalized, engaging for the learner, for the worker in that model. And ultimately what that's resulting in is much more, streamlined time to revenue or time to productivity for the worker.
I can also see that from the employee standpoint or the worker standpoint, they feel a lot more motivated because their time is being honored, their former skills are being honored. Just like if you took honors classes in high school, and you know what, you've earned that credit, and you don't have to pay the extra hours to the college, right? So you're kind of taking that same skills mindset into the enterprise workforce.
You nailed it, 100%.
Hashtag nailed it. So, John, anything you want to add there? I know while we're just basking at your beautiful view there in Hawaii regarding how you're noticing and observing organizations adopting their approach or changing their approach.
Yeah, so I think the big thing with this that I think some organizations are struggling with is everything that Jai said. There's clear, tangible outcomes if you take this approach. But the question is, how do you get there up front? From the traditional sense of HR processes where you start the year by looking at goals, and then at the end of the year, you look at whether or not you've achieved them. With this, it takes a bit more thoughtfulness to understand within each job role, what are the skill sets required? And then boiling that up from a higher level from an organizational perspective, what do we need to achieve our mission for this particular year? And so it requires looking at each job role and understanding what those skill sets are. And in the end, from a development perspective, employees are much more clear about what it is that they need to do once those gaps are identified between where they are and where they need to be. But also the organization as a whole understands where they are versus where they need to be. And so it does take some thoughtfulness of mapping through understanding what the organizational objectives are, what the job role objectives are, and before you can get to start doing those assessments to see where people are. And so it does require HR and working with trained professionals understanding how to do those mappings. And working with executives to understand what the mission of the organization is, and then be able to pull all that stuff together in terms of being able to then map it into a system, HR system, to be able to track it going forward.
So this is an open question to either of you then. Thinking about this, obviously, from the workforce perspective, could this potentially then boost employee engagement from just an overall career pathing perspective?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's several things emerging on that front. One is, engaging the worker learner in that learning journey, because you've now got an incentive, right? You talked about that. My time is valued, and I know why I'm engaging with these learning resources. They're specifically advancing my capabilities in these areas. But the second phase of that is the organization has told me they value these skills. They value them because they're needed in the future for us to be successful in the company. So I'm going to fit into that future picture better. So I have incentive from a job retention perspective. And then the final piece of that we're seeing that I think is super exciting is the concept of pay for skills. So, in the past, the way you get
got my attention.
The way you get rewarded often is, a promotion, right? And not everyone, the organization can't offer everyone a promotion because you become a top-heavy organization. But the organization also understands, especially in today's labor market, that I can't have valuable skills walking out the door. So if I've gone through the work of identifying the critical skills for the future of my business, I've mapped them to roles, operational roles, I've assigned those to people, and now those people are doing their part of the bargain and coming through and developing themselves towards those skills, that becomes a really powerful combination of data. The last piece of that is now I can start to understand that when you hit certain skill or capability milestones, I can offer you more reward in the form of compensation relative to that achievement, so you don't walk out the door. I'm being proactive. There's a trust in that contract between the worker and the organization. If there's real-time feedback that if I achieve these capabilities, I automatically are going to be eligible for this additional compensation. And I think that's super exciting to see organizations taking that type of a mindset to how they can use this data again and engage the worker in the journey.
Yeah, and I think that look, I don't know very many successful people that just as a human being, let alone from an employee perspective, that wouldn't like to understand where they are and where they're going, right, in life. So
right, that's pretty foundational.
So from a personal perspective, most people like to understand where they are and where they're headed. And so from an engagement perspective, what this does is it provides employees, whether they want to be good at what they're doing right now, or whether they want to be able to understand what are the paths forward for me from a career development perspective. I can look at any particular job role and understand what are the skills that are required to be able to do my job now, or to be able to do something else that I may want to do in the future, and then understand what do I need to do to get there. From a different and even at different proficiency levels. And then to Jai's point about tying that back to compensation, I can then understand how I'll be rewarded for that. So it's just very, as you said, it's very foundational. And so it takes things from being much more nebulous from a traditional process perspective and makes things much more concrete for employees. And so without question, it lends itself to being able to truly engage employees in understanding where they are and where they're headed.
Let's think about if you're saying, okay, I'm liking this. I want to approach skills management here. So I'm just going to put this out here. Are there some different ways of approaching skills management to accomplish that same end goal?
So I think that we should start with the end goal.
Okay.
And you need to define what the end goal is. And that is, it sounds easier sometimes than everyone, sure, this sounds great. If I had a dashboard I could pull up with, my entire workforce and their proficiency against the critical skills of my organization, fantastic. The question again comes back to, why are we collecting this data? In field services organizations, that may be, again, because I need to make better assignments of personnel against customer jobs, that they're better fit, or my customers' business strategy is changing. They're going into renewable energy. I need to take all my wind or my electrical turbine mechanics and turn them into wind turbine mechanics. Whatever that goal is, there needs to be a true business outcome that you're measuring and trying to achieve. If not, I would say, sure, there are different ways of kind of accomplishing skills management. It can be as nebulous and loose as, going to a open source skills cloud or skills ontology and making all of that available to your end user or worker, and then they can self-direct their, choose your own adventure when it comes to skills. That's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is, again, these hard business outcome driven skills initiatives that have critical skills identified per job role, and you really validate the user proficiency and have trust in that data to drive that outcome. And I think we see programs throughout that spectrum. My bias is that, the ones that are more geared towards operational outcomes are the ones that are going to be around in 5, 10, 15 years because they will have made your workforce a competitive advantage.
John, what about you on this? Are you tracking with that? Do you have a little different perspective?
No. No, totally tracking with that. And I know I'm about to say something that's really shocking, but even more fundamental than this, that like with any HR technology implementation or initiative, it has to have executive leadership and sponsorship. And so to even get to the point, the points that Jai was making, this is all driven by executives that have a vision and understanding where their organization's going, what information they want to be looking at to be able to make strategic decisions. And so it's then going to HR and asking, for help and support. And, what I will say is that, my experience in the past is that when HR isn't able to support these types of initiatives, those executives are going to go somewhere else where they can find somebody that can give that, whether it's operations or finance or whoever, that can give them very tactile responses in terms of the information that they're looking for. So it really is about executive leadership and understanding what it is, where the organization is, where they're headed, and providing that guidance and direction for being able to pull together these programs and understanding the next steps. It's not rocket science. It really isn't. It's a function of just having a vision and being able to have the right consulting partner and technology partner to work with you to pull these things together.
As somebody's driving right now, they're listening to this podcast and they go, I like this idea of skills management. It sounds kind of exciting. What would be some of the first steps that you both would recommend?
I think, again, once you have clear vision as to why you're doing this, then I think it's, as John said, it's a question then of going through a pretty focused exercise of identifying critical roles within the organization and what skills and capabilities align with those roles. And there's a way to do that. There's a methodology, and that's where a partner like GP Strategies really comes in terms of helping you structure a really good way of getting to that content, if you will, that skills framework, the governance, the ability to define those job task analysis and break down those roles into the critical elements. And then, marrying that up with technology to bring it all to life. And there's a way, there's a methodology to that. There are best practices to do that. It doesn't have to be a big, weighty 3-year exercise. We're helping organizations do that in very quick turnaround times.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the last comment that Jai made was the one that to me that's most important, is that a lot of times people can feel like they're getting crushed by the weight of just the thought of a program like this, and it doesn't have to be that way. To take a shot across, the big strategic consulting groups that love to get as many people in the door to help out with these types of things, and it's in their benefit for these things to be long, protracted, development cycles in terms of pulling these programs together. My suggestion is always, don't try to boil the ocean. A lot of times what works really well with this is to pick a critical area of specific job roles or skill sets that there's going to be some traction. For instance, engineers love stuff like this, right? Engineers, talking what I was saying earlier about, knowing where you are and where you're headed. That's engineers to a T. So you can usually find groups within an organization that naturally will gravitate towards these types of programs, and you can pick a subset of job roles out, do those mappings, and move forward. And obviously, in terms of looking at the technology, it's not looking for technology that is an all singing, all dancing elephant that can do everything. It's something that this needs to be very specific in terms of what you're trying to achieve. Can I assess my employees against the skill sets that we require? And once we identify the gaps in those skill sets, what is the result of that output, and can it easily map and integrate into a career development program moving forward?
Gentlemen, this has been a thrilling conversation. We appreciate your insight today.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Michael. Appreciate it.
The Performance Matters podcast is brought to you by GP Strategies. Together, we can create a world where business excellence makes possibilities achievable. You can subscribe to the show anywhere you get podcasts or listen on our website at gpstrategies.com.